Our next guest today is Diana Rocket Sykes, who's the emergency manager for the city of Moreno Valley. Diana recently led a major upgrade to the city's Emergency Operations Center, or EOC, implementing AV over IP and smart presets to create a flexible, multi-purpose space. Now, with the push of a button, the EOC can seamlessly transition from coordinating emergency responses, like wildfires or extreme weather events, to hosting non-emergency meetings and presentations, all in a way that's intuitive for non-technical users. Right after these ads. Have you ever watched a production and thought, wow, that lighting is perfect, but then the host stares into the void like they forgot how to read? Yeah, that's because they didn't use ICANN. See, ICANN makes top-tier studio lighting, prompters, and gear that keep productions looking and running smooth. So whether you need buttery soft LED lights or rock-solid teleprompters so you don't forget your lines, or just pro-level gear that won't let you down, ICANN has you covered. So if you want your production to look like $1 million without spending $1 million, check out ICANN. Because great lighting and a good prompter can make anyone look like a pro. Diana, thank you so much for joining us today. I think we should just jump in because we have a lot to cover. I'd love you to briefly explain why EOCs are critical for city operations, but I also want you to actually define what EOC is for folks who are listening.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me today. So an emergency operations center at the local government level is a physical plant, a physical location where personnel from within the city come together to manage disaster conditions. So you have a conglomerate of subject matter experts performing various functions in order to restore the city to pre-disaster conditions.
Fantastic. And you've recently gone through a very large upgrade, Moreno Valley. Can you talk a little bit about how large that scope was so everyone listening kind of has an idea of the scope and scale?
Yeah, absolutely. So the city EOC prior to this upgrade was built in 2012. And as we know, technology has evolved, tremendously. So this involved the complete upgrade, the redo, if you will, of the technological systems that run and support the backbone of the Emergency Operations Center. So it was infrastructure, cabling, fiber, things like that, as well as technology such as TVs, monitors, projectors, things like that.
So that's, if my math is right, that's about 13 years ago when the previous system was put in. So what are kind of some of the specifics? Was it all new cameras, all new projectors, flat monitors instead of CRTs? Was there anything else that can give everyone kind of a scope of how old the technology was?
Yeah, so we had previously, display-wise, we had probably about 10 TVs where people could see data, visualize data, and now we have over 40 of those available for people to consume data. As we know, people don't consume data now in verbal form. We consume it in visual form. So that upgrade piece alone was tremendous. We also went from traditional projectors, which don't work well in LED lighting settings, and we went to a short throw projector to give us one massive display area, which has been a tremendous upgrade in and of itself. And then also just the infrastructure, taking the technology where instead of being static, that technology now moves and is flexible to work with the responders. So from TVs and monitors, just the entire system is now super intuitive to the user, as opposed to previously, the user had to work with the system within the system limitations.
I kind of like that, the kind of switch of the users working for the system or the system working for the users, which also kind of brings up that there's challenges obviously involved in that are not technical related. So I imagine there was a lot of retraining, a lot of reframing about how technology can work for this purpose, as opposed to just putting it out there and saying, use it.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that an EOC, an Emergency Operations Center, is designed to do is to allow for communication. Emergency operations is 90% about communications and getting the right people having the right conversations in real time as that incident, as that emergency is unfolding. And what that prior system made us do is we had to sit in specific locations based on people's positions. we don't live in that world anymore. We need to be able to get up and move and go to where those conversations are happening. And as most professionals nowadays know, we can't leave. We need our laptops. We need our MacBooks, right? And so what this new system is designed to do is if I'm having a conversation with you over here and oh, now there's another issue, I can unplug from where I'm at, go over to a completely different area within the emergency operations center, plug in, I'm still on the network. I haven't, it's like I'm at my own desk. Every position, everywhere I go at all 69 positions in that EOC. And it's just an amazing thing to have that capability.
So the technology you've mentioned so far is often what we call rip and replace, right? Where you're just wholesale moving the tech out and modernizing it. And then you've also mentioned kind of the seating restrictions. What were some other considerations when you went for the new redesign? Were there new technologies that you'd have to have a certain section for, or new gear that had to come in, which changed how things work? So were there other things that had to be considered and not just the updating of the technology?
Yeah, absolutely. So the physical limitations was one, but the other piece of that was looking at it from a completely different perspective. We function in 2025 very differently than we did in 2013. And so looking at it from the language that I speak as an emergency manager versus the language that the technology folks meet and trying to find a way to mirror those was challenging. And but really the premise is finding a way to make the communications work for us. And that was a challenge because when you have, as you know, when you have an existing space, that is much more difficult to do. Than if you're doing a brand new design from the floor up. You have to work within the walls. You have to work within the capabilities of the infrastructure that's there. So it was definitely a challenge and one that thank goodness for the professionals that we had, not only internally, but our vendors to make that happen because the facility is not all encompassing, right? It's not as big as you need it to be. You're within the existing 4 squares of those walls. And, you know, that poses a challenge when you're trying to do an upgrade that requires modern day technology and infrastructure.
And speaking of that, you mentioned the ability for faster and more efficient communication, and also the adding of new technology. And one of the things that Keycode deployed was AV over IP. And that obviously was part of the communication backbone of how the tech works and how everyone communicates with one another. Can you talk a little bit about how that works and how that has kind of made things a little bit more faster and efficient?
Yeah. So the technology that they were able to put in, I mean, when I say the technology, moving at the speed of technology, it is amazing. With a single point and click, I can change all 40 displays at once. I can change them individually. The camera systems that we have, two of our main rooms are Teams enabled with very high technology, high sensitivity cameras that allow great communication in real time. And that technology alone is just, it's so super fast that you forget that you're on TV, or you forget that, you know, you're in a space that is designed within such limitations, because the speed of everything, it's literally controlling and disaster response at the push of a button. As fast as I can click my fingers, things are changing.
Well, that speaks a lot to automation, right? Because if you click one button and it does 10, 20, 100 different things, that obviously increases or decreases your response time because there's automation put into there. So have you found that you have just hundreds or dozens or hundreds of presets, or do you find that you've kind of pared it down to make it easier for someone to understand the system?
So what we did was in our world, presets are important because what we do is we are an all hazard response emergency operations center. So we have to be prepared to respond to whatever the hazard type is. And so what we did was we set presets based on hazard type. So you have fire, flood, winds, power, man-made, right? Terrorism. And so these presets allow us at the push of a button to start an incident, turn everything on, and we're ready to go for that specific incident type. So what's displaying around the room are the dashboards and the interactive dashboards and the displays that we need from all of our partners and stakeholders to be effective in that response. If it's a weather-based response, one of our main displays might be the National Weather Service, right? So in that preset, that's already there. We don't have to think about that or later go, oh, shoot, let me put that up. It's there because it's built into that preset. So that is an amazing piece that we got out of Key Code that we didn't even know we would have that capability when we started the design. And it's a critical function and a feature that we really love. We love that feature.
Technology giveth and technology taketh away sometimes. And right now there is just a deluge of technical information and opinions from people online regarding technology. So I'm really curious, when you were looking to undertake an upgrade of this size, what was your kind of research process like? Was it understanding the technology and then saying, this is too much, we need to find someone who understands this? Or was it going to other EOCs and saying, oh, there's some good ideas there, let's see if we can incorporate that into our refresh? Kind of what was the process there?
So there's a little bit of all of that. So I spent, prior to coming to the city for almost 3 years, I spent 17 and a half years as the County of Riverside Emergency Operations Center manager. So obviously I had worked through numerous systems and technologies there, which gave me a really wide breadth of what worked and maybe what didn't. The system that we ended up going with, which is a Crestron-based system, we had recently put in the new County of Riverside Primary Operations Center. So I was familiar with the touch and go, point and click kind of Crestron system. And so when we at the city of Moreno Valley, when we decided to undertake this, I knew that that was the basis of what I wanted to see in our city, the point and click, the minimal training required for 90% of the users to use, which is important, right? Because if I fall off the face of the earth or I'm out of the country, my staff and those that I've trained need to be able to do this. I do this every day and they don't, right? So I needed that. I talked to obviously colleagues and counterparts throughout the county. What works for you? What doesn't? If you had the opportunity, what would you get? What would you want to see? And so through those conversations, and then really just understanding at a very innate level through being an emergency manager, what I needed the system to be able to do, all of that came into play. And trying to explain that and convey that to technology-based folks who don't speak the EOC language, like you say, technology cometh and technology goeth. But on the other hand, sometimes we had to sit down and go, wait, what does this mean? Right? Diana, explain to me what this means and really what you want the functionality, and learning to tell them what I wanted it to do, not to try to tell them how to do it. Right?
I
So that was a big piece.
I absolutely love you brought that up, because a lot of times when we get into larger installs and deployments, often and rightly so, upper management is the one calling the shots. But I think it's imperative that the users of the system, no matter if it's creative or medical or EOC, are the ones actually using it. And without the input of the actual users, you can design a system that may functionally work, but it's not practical for it to work.
Yes.
So I'm so glad you brought that up.
That's a great point too, Michael. And I would just like to point out that this project was unlike anything. Being in government for 26 years, this project was unlike anything I had ever seen and project managed. And I'm going to tell you why. Because my city, the city of Moreno Valley leadership recognized the experience, and they said, we're going to go hands off with this. We're going to trust that you can move this project forward in knowing what's best interest for the city and working with the right people, bringing the right people to the table to make this project happen. There was no micromanagement. They trusted the process and allowed myself and other professionals to do the work that needed to be done. And because of that, I think the project not only moved forward timely, efficiently, but we got to the end result that we needed based on the subject matter experts. And that is a nod to the city and their true leaders, true leadership.
That's fantastic, and unfortunately, often that's in the minority that we
Yes.
normally hear that it's such
Yes.
a, we're going to let the experts do this,
Yes.
and we're just going to make checks and balances, but we know who knows how to do it right. So after all this time, after the project has come and come to completion, I'm sure you've looked back and looked at all the milestones, and I'd love to hear what advice you would have that you would give to other municipalities regarding upgrading their EOCs and things they should think about.
I think in hindsight, I think one thing that if I had to do it again is I would have probably had maybe one or two more brainstorming sessions before we started the physical rollout of the project. I think because what happened is when you go through the governmental request for proposal and you go through that process, we all know that takes time. And then you go through the award process, and then you have the initial meet and greet with the vendor. And then now the time clock starts ticking. We were so anxious, if you will, to get the project moving that I think that we started the project and had to kind of sort through some of that initial getting on the same page with regard to emergency management, technology, and how we wanted to bring those together. And I think had we stepped back, like flow charted, right? Here are the key points. Because one of the things when you have an RFP, you're bound by that RFP. And you don't know what you don't know when you don't know it, right? And and so I think that would probably be one of the things that I would change is just slowing the project down on day one to really flow chart and sketch that out a little bit more, because as we got into the project, we learned that there were some other technologies available, because with emerging technologies, it may not be there today, but tomorrow it may be. And our project didn't really allow for any of that flexibility. And in hindsight, I think in the RFP process, we could have maybe done some things differently to allow for that, if it benefited the city within a certain price range, if that makes sense. So, but other than that, I mean, I think that's probably the main takeaway.
I'm glad you brought up the part about RFP, and for the folks who aren't familiar, RFP is request for proposal, and that can involve multiple companies doing their own kind of investigation and putting together a summary of what needs to be accomplished, and then usually the municipality signs off on it, and then it goes to bid, and there are integrators and resellers who will then bid on that. But to your point, the time between crafting that proposal, the time between getting that out and it being engineered, and then the response, that can be months or even longer. And to your point, technology changes. And so the things that were suggested prior may no longer be as feasible or cost effective. So there can be some hiccups there. And that's why you really want to work with folks who understand that process and can kind of propose and then design knowing that there's going to be a lag. So there's ways to kind of update things without having to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, absolutely. And allowing for that in the budget, right?
Exactly.
Most projects have a traditional 10% overage or, something like that. But when you're talking about technology, that may or may not be sufficient. And terminology matters, because if I'm speaking to you as a layperson, right, saying, I want the camera to do this, and I want the camera to do this, or I want the camera to do that, and you're like, okay, yeah, but did not understanding that camera actually has 10 other things it can also do. But if you just hear and receive that from the requester, and you're like, well, I gave you what you wanted. Yeah, well, but you didn't tell me about the other 7 things. So, and those were things you have to work through. But I mean, that's typical project management. But definitely allowing for that would have been great. Next time.
In another 13 years.
Yeah, maybe.
Diana, again, thanks so much for your insight. Thank you so much for being on the call today. And thank you for being a client of Key Code Media.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure working with the team, for sure.
Thanks for watching Broadcast to Post. Please make sure to subscribe to the podcast to receive future episodes. Follow Keycode Media on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram to receive news on additional AV, broadcast, and post-production technology content. See you next time, folks.